So welcome to the Climateurope Webinars in this 2018. We had a first series, and now we are starting a new one. We're going to hear about developing climate services in Scandinavia today. We'll have two talks from Erik Kjellström here at SMHI, Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, and also by Stefan Sobolowski from the Uni Research Climate and Bjerknes Center for Climate Research in Norway. So we will start with Erik. Erik is the head of the Rossby Center, which is SMHI's climate research unit. He's an adjunct professor at the Department of Meteorology at Stockholm University. And research interests include the understanding of how different sources of uncertainty influence the regional and local climate, and working on how to present and make this information understandable. He's currently leading the C3S, so Copernicus Climate Change Service project, producing regional climate scenarios for Europe. So the Erik's presentation, we will have Stefan ask you then to put your questions in the chat box so we can address them. I'll turn off the camera because it's better for connection, and we'll start the presentation. I don't know if you want to do anything. No.
I can test it. Everyone hears me. So, okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Helena. Thank you very much. So, yeah, as the title says here, I'm going to talk about the production and use of the regional climate model projections here at SMHI. And we call it a Swedish perspective then on building climate services. I will quickly start by this very overview picture, saying that on climate services, it all stems from the demand for climate information. And we are surrounded by a lot of information about disaster events, climate extremes and weather extremes, and we get a lot of information from climate models and from the scientists that are producing climate scenarios, etc. And of course a lot of question marks, both for us and also for the future to come here, symbolized by this little chart. And all of these questions they relate to how to the changing climate and to the current climate, of course, but also a lot of things about what to do. What can I do as a person or in the society? So climate services, it stems from trying to answer these questions and provide this information. Yeah, someone who has the microphone on, so please mute the microphones for the time being. Thank you. I will just quickly go on then say something short about the SMHI. This is from a very official slide from the SMHI presentation. So it's SMHI is the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. And there are a few things to say here. We are an expert agency in Sweden under the government or under the Ministry of Environment and Energy. Responsible then we are the expert agency both for climate, but also for meteorology, hydrology, and also oceanography. Since we have a lot of expertise in-house here related not just to climate, but also to, for instance, hydrology, which is important for many of the impacts of climate and climate change. We, of course, work in a very strong national context here. We are an actor ourselves, and we are contributing a lot of information in terms of producing climate information, but also producing services. Of course, we are also very reliant on that there is good information to use on the international arena. A large department here at SMHI working consultancies, working with really helping out and getting tailored information for end users. So that's also an important part of what we are doing, both on the more on the private market, but also on the government side. So that's the field of SMHI, and we have been around for quite time. And here, in terms of climate, we have been working on this for a very long time. And you can see in this figure here some kind of timeline starting out from about 10 years ago, something like that. Now, when the first research program on climate modeling here in Sweden, it was called Sweclim. It ended then. And at that point, the Rossby Center, where I'm working, was integrated as a unit under SMHI. So things that have happened over these years, and in the top ones, the kind of blue fields that are something that we term here as externally driven. There are things that have been we had tasks from the government, etc., to develop information and to act in the society. We have been working in Sweden. First very big thing was this and vulnerability in 2005, and we worked for over years there, really meeting with a lot of sectors and people from many sectors in Sweden, looking at all aspects of climate change. And already then it started out as a kind of a approach where we talked to many users and end users and got a perspective of what they wanted and needed, and then we could try to talk to them and help them out with information. Sometimes also saying that we couldn't provide information required. All of the details here, but over the years there have been more from the government on different authorities in Sweden, and the central thing here in the center of the slide in 2009, you can see on top of the slide of the timeline there that the county administrative boards were tasked by the government in Sweden to work with regional climate adaptation, and that's an important step, since on this really regional, almost local level, there is the need for climate change and climate change information to act upon in the municipalities and on the county side. Since a few years ago, a national knowledge center for climate change adaptation here in SMHI that we are working closely with, we as scientists now I'm saying. And then from the externally driven ones, there have also been a lot of internal SMHI driven activities over the years. And I will not go through them too much here, but there have been both work internally at the SMHI, but also jointly with other agencies in the expert agencies working mainly more on and also other adaptation issues, etc. The summary of this one is that we have had an ongoing dialogue with both government, but also with different stakeholders and end users and next users, if you use that word as well, for a long time. For it's more than a decade. It's almost it's more than 15 years actually, and it resulted in the establishment of web-based climate service that I'm going to talk about now here in the next few minutes. So we are doing at the Rossby Center. We have been doing this for a long time. We are doing climate modeling. We are doing both global modeling, but from the beginning also we worked very much on regional climate modeling. And the idea is of course to try to develop more detailed information on the region. And this is here in this slide where you can have higher horizontal resolution in a climate model when you apply it on smaller scales. So you can see the maps at the bottom showing Scandinavia here at 2 different resolutions. A bit about this, we can see what the users want, and this graph to the right here is a map of this Great Stockholm region. This is about 50 by 50 kilometers. This is a typical size of a grid box in one of these regional climate models. This grid box particularly lives about 2 million people, and they have quite a lot of need for climate information. And also you can see from the graph and the satellite picture here that the service is quite diverse, and you have both the sea, and you have lakes, and you have forests and urban areas, and different degrees of population and housing, etc. So need for information at different scales. And you can also see a lot of lines in this one, and I will not go into the detail here, but this 50 by 50 kilometer is a kind of a standard horizontal grid spacing resolution in regional climate models used in the CORDEX activity. CORDEX stands for Coordinated Regional Climate Downscaling Experiment, where information has been provided in over all continents of the world, basically, at this resolution. You have a lot of simulations done at the kind of greenish area here, the green dashed line at 12.5 kilometer grid. So that's quite, it's very much a resolution. So this is provided, and here at SMHI in particular, we have been doing a lot of experiments here, downscaling many different global climate models, and these are, and here to the left, a lot of strange acronyms saying what these models are labeled. We have taken from the global climate model, saying something about the large picture, and then downscaling this to provide more detailed information over Europe. And we have this for a number of different scenarios, forcing scenarios. These are the 3 RCs, the so-called representative concentration pathways, with missing amounts of greenhouse gases from 2.6 to 4.5 to 8.5 at the right end. This tells us something about the kind of matrix that we have available for looking into climate and climate change aspects. So these there are also a lot of other models around on the international arena, but we have focused on this Swedish setting here, since we think we have both some possibilities to say something about the uncertainty related to forcing. We have the 3 scenarios here, but also in terms of different uncertainties in how the future climate may develop, as we have all of these 10 different global climate models on the other axis here. So based simulations, we have, or I should say that it takes quite some time to set up this information. So we have set up some kind of production chain. It requires a lot of people working on this. Import lateral boundary conditions, to models on high performance computers, to post-process data and to quality check all of this, and finally to publish data somewhere so that they can be used. And all of this, the chain here, it's quite important, it's quite technical. It's not so most people outside of our little group, but it's really important to be able to have this information at all to work with. And I'm guessing here that this is something that really needs some resources on an international level. And so we have then at SMHI, we have set up this information then as a tool. We look at maps and diagrams showing different aspects of climate change in Sweden. And this now intentionally in Swedish, since it's of course we have the users in Sweden. We also have an English version of this one, but I was thinking I should show this one here, since language is a very important thing also in climate services. So I think it's important to realize that we can speak to our end users in the language they want to use, and even it's most often Swedish. So what we can see in this, I will quickly go through this a little bit, and we can look at different parameters and indices based on kind of pre-experience and also what end users and other stakeholders have been asking us for. So they want to look at specific things, and then we have derived the information about this. So you can have a look at this. There are a number of these indices which you can then look at diagrams to see how these things can change. Of course, a lot of demands from the users, but there are also some limitations from our side, from the modeling groups, since we know the model is maybe not very good at some specific things, and we cannot really deliver that kind of information. So we may say that, okay, well, we cannot do too much about that thing here. About the indices, we can also look at other things here. There are a lot of different selections you can make here, depending on what you're interested in. Here it's I think here says län in Swedish, which means counties. So the map now shows the Swedish counties, and the counties I mentioned before. So this is where the administrative information about climate change adaptation is really worked upon a lot in Sweden. What districts and runoff areas, etc. If you're more interested in that instead. So you get also new and old scenarios, and this is a service that came up from the discussion with the users. They had already done a lot of work on older scenarios here, all these stress scenarios, and they wanted to have that old information to be able to compare with. What is the new thing that you are coming up with? And they asked, how does it compare to what we already knew? So we are providing information too. We got a read that they wanted to link whatever is happening to the observed climate. So here is information about the observed climate from SMHI stations where we are monitoring climate and climate change. So this graph shows temperature changes over time, and the anomalies here in the red and blue bars are saying something about the past climate, what has happened. And say something then about the main direction and uncertainty of the climate change here, where the map shows the mean out of these different symbols, and then the black line also shows this mean, and then there is some kind of uncertainty here. In this case, it's the standard deviation over the simulated, or displayed by the gray area in this view graph. So this is the kind we derived from this page here. But then we have other things as well, apart from getting up this web page. There has of course been a lot of attention to this, but also a lot of demands for additional information and help in this. So there are questions from users. Practical thing, what is a climate scenario, and scenarios are there around, and how can these be used, and maybe also not how can they not be used. And we are also providing some guidelines that we have developed in Swedish then for this, how to use this information in these scenarios, and how that can be used then also in a climate change adaptation context. Another thing is not just providing this information, but also having a dialogue with users. So there have been from these key administrative boards that I come back to time, that have been working set up, and also meetings with them. So they have been able to meet the experts here from SMHI more about what is shown in all of these maps and graphs and what is the science really saying. We have had a lot of seminars, but we have also tried to look into what they need by surveys, etc. I also want to say that this climate scenarios maps information is shown here. It's quite good material to use also for when we are talking with people in India, for instance, when they are calling us, asking about things. You can always show them these maps and have that as a starting point in the conversation. Short experiences here before I finish, and some conclusions as well. We have found now, from looking at this from this long perspective, that this kind of iterative approach informing climate services in parallel with the users, where we have always had interaction with the people using this information. We think that's been successful, and we can say that because we know that it's being used and also considered useful by many of these climate, the county administrative boards in particular, but also others. What we saw over time, and also after the timeline I showed before, there is a continued demand for new information about specific questions, and now there is about this the IPCC report coming up this fall, for instance, about the 1.5 degree warming. And then we have developed some pretty information also for that climate. What could that look like in Sweden, since it has not been around before. There are always questions about what will happen in the long term, beyond 2100, and so far we have to say that we cannot really do too much, since there are not so many scenarios, so we cannot derive detailed information. And also, of course, these are large on those time scales. Wants for more indices and more local information and more help with interpretation, etc. So these are things that we are continuously having a dialogue with the users on. But we even this information, which we think as a scientist, climate scientist, things are quite easy to understand, these maps and the graphs, etc. It's still often seen as being too difficult, and we have demands for providing more easy information that can be used really by us here in this local municipality, the city. How can we use this information? And also wrote down here climate anxiety. We have a lot of talks and meet a lot of actually people in schools, etc. And quite many youngsters in particular, they're quite anxious about the future, what will happen, and what can we do about this. So it's an experience. It's not just to information about possible future climate change, but also the expert agency here. We should really try to link also to activities and things that people can do, both on a personal level, but also on a level, but also on a larger scale as well. What can we do as a member of the society to prevent future global warming and future disasters that the students or in the schools are often talking about? Communication strategy for climate here at SMHI, partly based on the experiences from work with the web tools here, where we are trying to look at which groups to focus on, and yeah, we can maybe come back to that later also. Here, there is a paper here from 2016 describing much of this, where you can read more about how the develop this web tool in Sweden, and also to see something how about the information in these maps, etc. And you can find that there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, thank you, Erik, for your presentation. Now I'd like to present Stefan. So Stefan is joining us from Norway, where he's a research professor and research leader at the Uni Research and Bjerknes Center for Climate Research in Bergen. He's in a wide array of topics related to climate services, from basic research to understanding how convective extremes respond to climate change, to styling or distilling and communicating climate information for decision making. So, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear me. I assume I'll get a chat message if for some reason they cannot. I just to say thank you very much. This isn't actually where I wanted to be in my presentation. Let's see here to the beginning. There we go. Okay. So, first of all, thank you very much, Helena, for inviting me to give this talk. And it's fitting that I follow up Erik's talk, which is very much on the provision of so-called climate services, with something that cuts more to the challenges that we face in actually make provision of these resources relevant for decision making. So I'm going to relay something that we've experienced here in Norway that I think is very much applicable and also relevant for stakeholders and also climate service providers elsewhere. So it's I don't think this is unique just to Norway. So to give this discussion in two parts. The first part is going to be a brief overview of how we have developed climate services and the provision of climate services in Norway, which is a little bit different than what you saw recently from Erik. We're structured in a bit of a different way. We have some different challenges. And then also we'll relay some of the challenges that have arisen through the course of engaging in these activities over the last 3 or 4 years that caused us to sort of rethink our approach a little bit and decide to take a step back and kind of re-engage with our stakeholder community on a much more equal footing and hence the hackathon-like workshop that I'm going to spend the second half of my presentation presenting. I learned many useful and some new things from this exercise, and I think that it's also useful in the sense that it's very flexible, it's amenable to changes, it's very amenable to iteration. So we see this as a first step in that we will continue to iterate on this formula and continue through the course of various projects and our engagement with climate services in Norway. So first, my colleagues on this, there are a number of them, but in particular Matthew Stiller-Reeve and Hanna Kvamsås, who were really the engines behind this exercise. Without this would not have happened, and so they deserve a round of thanks for putting this forward, and also continuing the follow-up work that needs to be done in order to keep the momentum going from these exercises. So we have a center in Norway, like Sweden, where much of this kind of activity falls under one roof in SMHI. In Norway, this is spread out among many different institutions. The Climate Service Center in Norway is administered underneath the Environment Directorate and is managed by the Norwegian Meteorological Institute. Collaboration between them, the Norwegian Water and Energy Directorate, and my institute, Unisearch, and also the Bjerknes Center for Climate Research. So you have 4 different actors who are collaborating on a common mission. And the mandate for the Norwegian Center for Climate Services is shown here. It's to provide decision makers with information relevant for climate adaptation in a changing climate. So information that we produce is shown here on the right-hand side, which is showing flood changes under the so-called RCP 8.5 pathway, which is a climate change projected pathway. These are percent changes in 200-year floods. So this is the amount of increase in the 200-year flood value over today's, and you can see that we see increases all over Norway with some decreases in the northern part and eastern parts of Norway. And no question, however, is how this information is then used and integrated into decision-making contexts. So it's then put into a very large report, which was released in 2015, Klima i Norge. And this is the result of collaboration among our research institutes, among many others, and kind of sending the knowledge basis for climate adaptation. And it's an update from a 2010 report, which had the same name, which was using the most up-to-date information at that time. So the major change for the most recent report is that we included information from the most recent IPCC reports and model simulations from those reports. So from this sort of guide report, a series of climate fact sheets were devised for each of the counties in Norway, and there are 19 of these in all, about 8 pages long each, and they contain relevant information for specific counties and areas. Now, we also have a web portal which is very similar in some ways to what is shown in SMHI, where people can go in and choose different types of information and get climate change at the community level or the county level, as well as the national level. Shown here is the reduction in snow season. They have a number of indices which can also be selected. Question to all of this is how this information then makes its way into decision-making processes at the local level. So I'm thinking about counties and municipalities. And quite a lot of work among these actors. And the usual way of going about the dialogue is to do surveys, to have workshops, to engage in questionnaires, etc., etc. And others have come to our attention over the years through going through this process. And it is challenges that have caused us to take a step back and to engage. I'll present in the talk, which was the hackathon approach. So one of the challenges is related to structure and roles. Currently, the approach to climate services in Norway is very top-down and project-oriented. It's mandated by the Environment Directorate, and the funding for these activities largely comes through projects which are funded through the Norwegian Council for Research Council, so that these activities are time limited. So the projects that you saw on the very first page of presentation running for maybe 2 more years, and then we will either or it will. There's also, we noted, a lack of a stable organizational framework for knowledge development and exchange. So there's no clear place where all of the different actors can come together and share ideas, and also to guidance and also brainstorm for ways forward. Also, we noticed that the preferences are not clear-cut or predefined. So this is a sense where multidisciplinarity can be a problem. You have scientists such as myself with a background in physical science. We have hydrologists. We have social scientists. We have people with operations specialties. We also have municipals and planners and everything in between. And this can sometimes be a problem because all have different responsibilities, all have different constraints, and all have different pressures. Also, participation is fluid. So, like the project problem, different project scientists can come in and come out of participating in so-called climate services provision, depending on availability of funding. So too for communities, the municipalities, and the county, participation can be fluid. You have your regular turnover that one has in these organizations. You have political cycles that they have to adhere to. So funding can change depending on which political parties are in power, or availability of funds, or even according to natural disasters that may occur in some of the smaller communities. And this is always an issue. Related to these issues of structure and roles are the lack of formalized evaluation frameworks. So an open question is, are we fulfilling this mission statement? Are climate services that are being provided making it into decision-making frameworks? Products actually used. If we ask, the communities all say, yes, we love these products, we use them. But there's no current evaluation metric or criteria or framework in place to really evaluate this in a rigorous fashion. And it remains to be seen who are the appropriate actors to do this evaluation. Should it be performed by the climate service providers? Should it be performed by the users of the information? Or should this be done by external actors? So an example I'm showing on the right-hand side here is a study from Wall et al. In 2017, where they defined 45 different indicators for evaluating climate services. Now, I expect people to read these. The point is that they are extensive, and they separated these into 5 different categories. It's called inputs, process, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And we feel nature is needed in order to properly assess the impact that climate services is at the local scales. And final challenge is engagement. As I said in his talk, dialogue is critical, and dialogue over a long period of time even more critical. It's necessary to build trust. This is how meteorological services have evolved over the decades and decades that they've been around. This is necessary for effective climate services as well. Also, we noted that the climate services need to be integrated into existing decision-making processes. If fit into the structures that have been in place also probably for decades, then they don't get used. Each municipality and county has very local needs, even within similar climate zones, so custom tailoring is needed. And this requires sustained local engagement. as Erik had noted, that these kinds of activities require investment in time and investment in resources. And at the Flowchart, that kind of shows this top-down approach we have now with the Environment Directorate at the top and down near the bottom. And that we need more bottom-up engagement. So engage right where the climate information rubber hits the road, as you may see. After these realizations, we decided, rather than do another workshop associated with one of the projects that I am leading, that we would take a step back and talking at each other, try to talk with each other, and try to take the stakeholders and the providers and put everybody on an equal field and really evolving dialogue. Hence, we came to the hackathon. Now, what your typical history hackathon looks like: people leaping at their tables, junk food all over the place. These folks have probably all been up for about 30 hours straight, but they're all working very closely together in teams. They're being creative, they're engaging, and they're working towards a common goal. But we didn't want something that looked like this. We wanted the positive aspects of the hackathon and do away with some of the more, to our minds, positive in the context that we were envisioning. So this is to what we decided to do. Is we didn't want to have all-nighters. It's not competition. Groups that we had were by design, and the assignment was by design. The groups had a social scientist, a physical scientist, municipals, and then we had enough participants in the so-called Clean Mathen that we were able to also include non-government organizations like environmental groups, also some private actors as well. So the similarity quote hackathons is that there was collaborative work over an extended period of time, in this case about 1.5 days, and the freedom to interpret the assignment and to iterate as they saw fit. And so in hand, we set about the Climateurope, as we called it. So this is in Norwegian. This is the flyer that we sent out. The message and the task was to design a flexible strategy for climate adaptation decision making in Norwegian municipalities. Now, later, when I show the results from this, that we fell short of this goal. That's only because this gave an opportunity to really delve into the existing problems and knowledge gaps that are between the use of climate information and the provision of climate information. So it was a tremendous success. But I'll come back to this issue a little bit later. So the is forward. We spent the first morning information about what the Climate Service Center in Norway is, what it's there for, how it sees its role in society. Then also where are we with climate service in Norway, which is presented by of our climate scientists as well as one of our social scientists working on the issue, and review on decision-making processes and how climate information makes it into decision-making processes. And this is from a colleague, Cicero Hege-Veskog, who engaged in some these activities in a county in eastern Norway. Then we went into our different groups and engaged in group work for the rest of the time. So Erik Kolstad, in this, he is explaining to the participants in the Climateurope some of the challenges and issues that we face as climate scientists in reproducing or just producing tailored information at local scales. He's linked to part of Bjerknes, Norway, which is a complex topographic region with fjords and waterways and steep topography, and extremely challenging to produce localized climate information. And that even with our models running at their highest resolutions possible, the information provided is smoothed considerably. And this speaks to issues that Erik raised before, where there are limits to what we can reliably provide stakeholders. And it's important that we provide the guidance and the guide, also the explanations on where the limitations lie, what is credible, and what is also uncertain, and why. The task given to these different groups was to work and try to map out a process that integrates climate information, and to get a group to present their challenges, bottlenecks, knowledge holes, skills gaps in the process that they have today. To use their own experiences. So many of these people from municipalities have already done this. All of the municipalities and counties in Norway have a requirement from the central government to do climate adaptation plans and strategies. They don't get a lot of guidance on how to do this, but a lot of them have been working on this in the past. And then points to try to take discussions a little bit, or that they should discuss the current challenges that they have, describe the decision-making processes that they have now, and how they visualize how these challenges have been met, and how they might be improved in the future. They are urged to design solutions and develop proposals that can improve and clarify the decision-making process for climate adaptation and responsibility allocation in the process. So what we gave was a flowchart that showed where important networks come in, where resources have to be applied, and knowledge providers and decision makers are included, for example. Urged to identify what's required for solutions to be implemented. Climathon with presentations. Here's here from the Climathon in action. We had 12 groups of about 5-6 people in each group. Through the day and into the night, this is actually probably still early afternoon because this happened in January 2018, and it was really already dark by 1:30 or 3 o'clock. And then at the end of the Climathon on the second day, and this is Tarja Vandevik here presenting the findings from their group, and what this is in Norwegian, but I can translate very quickly. What this is showing is, say, what do we have to do to realize our, essentially. And they give some points here, and that what their group saw is some of the keys that need to be addressed for the robust uptake of climate information. So issues kind of rose to the top through this exercise, and this was what was really one of the most interesting and also encouraging outcomes from the Climathon, and it gives us the blocks to continue and iterate and to move on to the next stage. I'm going to focus on the ones where 6 or more groups highlighted the concerns, and some of them were not immediately intuitive to us. So not ones that we would have identified a priori before going into this, and that in some ways shows the utility of such an exercise. So note in this is poor political anchoring. 8 of the groups identified this as an issue. And by political anchoring, they mean that neither local nor national level politicians are involved in this climate adaptation and climate information services process. And that inhibits their ability to engage and integrate the information. This is one we easily would have identified. And this was identified by 11 of the 12 groups. So we make that we're filling some of these holes in knowledge and expertise, but from the side of municipal planners, these knowledge gaps are still there. And they're there from both the scientific side as well as from the planning side. For example, I have virtually no knowledge of the regulations and laws and constraints that a planner has to adhere to when implementing, say, a climate adaptation plan. As a planner doesn't have all of the information about the climate that they might need, and they may have access to it as well. So this is institutional inertia. So a lack of incentive to make changes to the way things are done. Lack of guidance and rules. It's not clear where responsibility lies. Is it from the top? Is it from bottom? Whose responsibility in between of responsibilities? This is related to the lack of guidance and rules. And last, global climate information. So this is information that is provided that may be of utility for us to say a physical scientist, but isn't particularly useful from a planning perspective. One example could be temperature changes, for example, in that if there's not a risk associated with temperature changes, so in a cost-benefit sense, then it's very difficult for a decision maker to make a choice about, say, a planning decision about where building is done or where building isn't done, or areas set aside for agricultural practices, areas transferred to some other use, without knowing what the potential costs and potential benefits are. Typically, we don't provide this in our climate assessments. We simply provide climate index changes, such as growing season length, or flooding increase, or, for example, snow season decrease. We're very, very clever about coming up with identifying problems. Where it's difficult was in identifying solutions. Someone was able to say, hey, we've got a problem. Then we ask, well, what's the solution? The solution is to solve the problem. And of course, this is true. But it lacks the specificity that's needed to actually attack it, right? So there were solutions given, things that we could do to move things along. So these are divided into 3 rough areas: teaching guidelines and laws, closer collaboration with financial institutes, and adaptation politically and more locally, more central roles for county levels. So this is the level in between the central national government and the very local scales. Of course, this is always a constraint. Early sessions to avoid conflicts, a more common language, so being able to bridge the gaps between physical science and planning, for example. Better networks. Clear cost, as I said previously. Better dialogue. More applicable climate data, so more tailored climate data. Better use of local knowledge are some potential solutions that were identified. Fewer specific suggestions that came out of this. And I think largely because much of the discussion was spent on identifying some of the gaps and the problems that are currently existing. Some of the specific ones were a regional climate forum, or FRA, where researchers and planners can come together and have discussions and free dialogue about the current state of climate knowledge and also about the current state of municipal planning and the future of that. Another suggestion was rent a researcher. So one of the that has come through in these discussions is that there needs to be a more consistent and a better liaison in between the physicists and the stakeholders. And that there actually requires potentially an additional position somewhere between there who has expertise that spans both and currently exist, at least not formally. So the feedback we got from this exercise, which is maybe relevant for others in the listening audience, is that the general impression was very good. We had something on the order of 70 participants. About half of them answered questions about it. The impressions were very good. Gives some of the real challenges that they have in their daily work, and for detailed feedback on what they found to be positive and what they thought was negative. So positive aspects were that there were new contacts, good conversations across areas of responsibility, linking more in the political arena, allowing dialogue to evolve freely. Often when we have workshops and presentations and conferences, there's not so much of a free-flowing dialogue in those places. Some feedbacks. One that mainly on a clearer framework for the work and focusing the issues more, and that there should be more structure. And this was largely a decision that we took early on to have it in a free and open way, because we thought that we had to set the first and to better understand where the problems lay, and the next iteration of the Climathon will for sure be more structured, I think, as we come out of this. And these were in the suggestions for the next time. So we choose 6 of the promising solutions that we can work on to elaborate and implement strategies. More communication, a more clear tasks for the groups. So a case study, for example, was another one, and on. And case studies. And finally, again, the aiming in the political arena comes up again. Involve politicians in our next iteration, and that's something that we plan to do. So political aspect is probably the one that was most new to us, and that is one that we hadn't seen before, that we are now taking into account as we move forward. It's just to anchor this politically, because without that, the stakeholders, at least in the public sector, don't see the own to push the agenda forward. So thank you very much again for inviting me. Feel free to contact myself or Matthew to learn more about what we are up to here at the Bjerknes Center, or interested in collaborating on climate services research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for this very interesting presentation. I would like now to let everyone interested that they can post questions through our chat box. At SMHI, we have quite a full room. I don't know if anyone here has a question for Stefan or Erik, or for both, but I can. So, Stefan, you mentioned that 11 out of 12 groups identified holes in knowledge and expertise, and that you were expecting that. I don't think that is so much holes in knowledge. Of course, they exist, and yes, researchers know about that. But I think it's much more about the gap between knowledge and the usability. So I'd like to hear from Erik and from Stefan, because we know we don't have to know everything about everything. We just have to communicate better with each other, scientists, with other scientists, and with the users. So I don't know if you want to start.
I can just taking a bit on what Stefan said when you had this dialogue with the users, and that you identified the lack of knowledge of exactly what kind of needs they had. And I think it's important to have that on a slide level. So you as a climate scientist, you need to know exactly what kind of information to convey, and maybe about if there are some thresholds involved or whatever, then it's interesting to know about that. But maybe it's necessary to know all about the legislation, etc., that is relevant for all of the different sectors, since that kind of task is too big as well for me. I think it's impossible to cover all of the different sectors and all of that information that is required in that sense. So it's not really possible, but I probably meet in a dialogue and discuss things with them to what kind of information that is needed. Yeah.
Yes. So I totally agree with you, Erik, and I think that's what was interesting about this exercise for us, is to know that the gap is larger than we anticipated, and that there's really a need for a liaison in the middle. in that you say you're absolutely right that as a climate scientist, we're not the right people to do that because we have knowledge of the regulatory frameworks, for example, and we'd have the intimate local knowledge of the political situation, for example, in a rural county in the north versus a urbanized in the south of Norway. And so what really crystallized for us was that there needs to be an intermediary, and that intermediary currently doesn't exist. At least not in Norway. It doesn't. That's where the challenge lies. I agree. I don't think that it's necessarily climate scientists that you want to populate that area. And in some ways, I think it's a challenge to decide who filled that role and how was it filled.
If I can again, I think that in some sectors we have such intermediate players. Like in Sweden, there's a union called Svensk Vatten, it's Swedish water, and they are working a lot with urban hydrology and sewage, etc. And they have been looking at these questions for some time, also financing some research and some development here at SMHI and other places as well, and written a lot of reports, etc. They have also come up with some national guidelines that can be used. So there is now like there is now 20% rule. They have a climate factor here, where when they are making new pipes for the municipalities, etc., that they put on top of everything to kind of some of the expect climate change aspects of increasing extreme precipitations. There are some players here and there, but so of course it's not covering all of the sectors in the society. But maybe that is an example to build from and look into what they are doing.
Yes, I agree. I think on water resources and water issues, we've been quite good. And same in Norway. They are also quite good on these issues. I think it's much more problematic at the sort of municipal planning level in some ways. Let's let some others get into.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Question from Nicola. Stefan, how did you choose and approach the participants from the Climateurope and persuade them to take part and engage? Stefan? Hi.
Hi. I couldn't find the button. Now
Okay.
I found it. Thanks very much, Nicola. Matt, I thanked previously profusely, and I will thank again. Went through a list of, I think, about 600 people who are affiliated with the various cities and municipalities in Norway in planning and development, and email them. And of course, we have our contacts through previous climate services activities, contacts through the Norwegian Water and Energy Directorate. So I said the water resources is really quite good at this kind of thing, and they've been at it for a long time. So we had a number of contacts through them as well. And basically, we tried to contact everyone that might possibly be interested in this. We focus mainly on municipalities and counties, so public sector, and not looking at sectors like hydropower or other energy sectors or agriculture, etc. So municipal planning. And the really great response, we had participation not only in Western Norway, but all the way from Northern Norway and even beyond. We had a participant all the way from Svalbard come down to stay with us, and basically to get them to take part, we We the stays if they needed it. We also covered, some for people coming from really far away, and that's pretty much what we did. It seemed to work quite well. I think if there's anything, it was really important that we really emphasized that this was for them. It's an exercise where we were trying to figure out, what do the stakeholders need? What do they want? It's more that we really wanted to sit down and listen to them.
Okay, we have another question from Mark Payne. I'm curious about the concept of an intermediary, because the experience that we are having in H2020 Blue Action Project is that they don't exist. It has to have essentially two links in the middle, a practical scientist and a sciencey end user. Is this your experience?
Yeah, Mark. We've been thinking about this a little bit here as well. I mean, some of us do have already, some of us already are practical scientists, and there are some end users who are sciencey, for example, stakeholders or end users who have degrees in meteorology, for example. But they exist in a formal sense, it's in the ways that Erik mentioned, but maybe he has some thoughts on this as well.
I'm also thinking that, I mean, there are many users, and it's quite easy to talk about this and end users, but we often have a picture with provide next user, and then finally end user. There are many users in it, like chain. So there are, I mean, we are providing climate change information from climate models and from, but often people working on impacts, and that's also researchers, and they are trying to convey this information to something useful, for instance, for some ecological effect or some reindeer husbandry in northern Sweden or whatever it can be. And then information in turn is conveyed to the next user, and then finally you end up with the end user. So I think there are a lot of intermediate steps here, but I don't really know if I got the question exactly right. But I see it more like a chain here with many different players, and it's not just the client service and the end user.
We also heard today about the importance of maintaining connections with stakeholders, and I'd like you to think about how we can maintain the successful relationships. For instance, in this Climateurope, all these people that were contacted, will there be a follow-up, or will they what done to maintain this contact?
So already planning the follow-up to this Climathon, and we will do the next iteration, I think, if not later this year, then early in 2019. We're also preparing a white paper to be submitted to the Environment Directorate to present the findings that we have in here. Yeah, so now the plan is to continue.
Yeah. Erik, is there like a plan or a strategy to maintain contact?
Yeah, so in terms of the county administrative boards that I talked about many times in my talk, I think there is a on dialogue with them and continued contacts from one year to the next. Of course, there is a problem, as Stefan also pointed out, about the participants there there is a fluency there as well. So, I mean, people are ending and going to new jobs, etc. But it's a relatively large group of people meeting up once or twice a year, and so there is some continuity in that end, at least.
Okay, so we have more questions, and now up. So I thank everyone that participated remotely and here in the room with us. I'd like to thank Marta Terrado, which is invisible for most of you, but she set everything up. So thank you very much, Marta. And yeah, and keep look at the Climateurope webpage, because we will have more webinars coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.